Welcome to Dive Deep, a ministry of Christ Wesleyan Church where we seek to go deeper and become better disciples of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Kyle Roberts, the pastor of spiritual formation here at Christ Wesleyan, and our current series, All In, discusses how we, the church, can truly be all in for Jesus in not just our beliefs, but in our actions as well. We're excited for you to hear Pastor Branden's thoughts about his sermon from this past weekend. Pastor Branden, thank you for being here with us.
Always a pleasure.
So I like to start out Dive Deep with a question of fun, just to get to know you and the other pastors a little bit more. So my question for you today is, what is the most useless talent you have?
Yeah, I'd probably say the most useless talent is probably I can do the hand flute.
Hand flute? What is a hand flute?
You just put your hands together.
Oh,
it's kind of like a bird call.
Okay.
But somebody in the 7th grade did it, and I was like, whoa, that's cool. And so, when I was on American Idol, well, I wasn't on, but when I was trying to be on American Idol, I actually played the national anthem for the cameras and the holding cell when there was about 125 of us left. So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Who knew that you could do something other than singing?
I did it on my honeymoon as well, and I won a talent contest at that resort. So
did they give you anything for it?
Yeah, I did Amazing Grace. I think they did. I got a T-shirt.
Okay.
Yeah, for doing it.
Do you mind trying something right now? Put you on the spot.
Hear Amazing Grace.
We could try.
You got to warm up. There we go. I could have done it.
That is awesome.
The Star Spangled Banner is a lot harder because it has so many more highs and lows, but I probably started that too high. Mm-hmm. But,
That's amazing.
That's my useless talent.
It's so cool.
It's cool, weird, and useless.
So if you're thinking of applying to be on the worship team here at Christ Wesleyan Church, we now have an open position for hand flutes. Feel free to connect with Pastor Mike in regards to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of our conversation. This past weekend, you talked about growing together and the importance of growing in the midst of our church. So let's hone in on the scripture that your sermon was based on yesterday, which was Acts 2:42 through 47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. What an incredible vision of the church, like continuing to meet together on a daily basis, continuing to break bread in their homes on a daily basis, and just doing so much for the church in this. I want to specifically get into verses 44 through 47, which had so much material to talk about. Luke describes the early church as meeting together every day, having everything in common, having glad and sincere hearts, and enjoying the favor of all the people. That sounds like an incredible church to be a part of. Yet, I can't think of one church in America today that stands up to this ideal that Luke talks about. So, can you explain what these categories mean and how we can embody those principles today? Let's start out with meeting together every day.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it doesn't really give a good liturgy to what exactly did they do. I know it said, they broke bread, so they ate together, they had a meal. Obviously, they remembered, Jesus' death, and then they prayed together, obviously, but they didn't say, how long they met, what was it exactly, but the reason they met every day is because this was so new. Jesus and Christianity and the things that Jesus taught, just imagine 30 years ago. That's not that long ago. Mm-hmm. I was 18. I remember it very well. So that's all time that went by. And so it's so new, it's so fresh. They wanted to learn more about, from the apostles about Jesus, of really, you got to walk with him and talk with him. He came to you, in, his post resurrected form. And man, what was it like? What did he teach? What did he want us to do? And so people just wanted to learn more about Jesus. That's why they met every day, because they wanted to be together because of their love for Jesus and wanting to know, what is this new relationship that's not based on religion? I don't understand it.
Yeah, it was so countercultural to what they had been taught that day. I mean, just look at the Pharisees. They were the ideal of Jewish culture, and yet it seemed that they were almost slaves to the law, and that there was no grace, there was no leniency in the midst of that. And I think that those laws had been put up by God, but then the Pharisees decided to add on to what God had originally given them in Scripture. So to have this radical change of Jesus introducing this new law of grace, and not just that, but also coming in the form of a man, God coming in the form of a man to challenge this system of belief, but also to add on to it that this is his ultimate plan at the end of it, to come down to restore humanity through the sacrifice of Jesus. And just that whole thinking pattern is radically different. So for the people to meet every day, they were trying to wrap their heads around it.
Well, they met in the temple courts as well. Mm-hmm. And so there's temple courts and there were homes, and you're like, wait, it's illegal. Why would they meet in the temple courts? So I did some research on this, and I didn't say this in the sermon, which is good while we're doing Dive Deep, is when they met in the temple courts, that was part of their Jewish culture still, because this book was written to mature Jewish Christians. And so they still met in the temple courts because that's what they've done. And so, the Jewish, synagogues were legal. And so they met together in that old style of the Jewish synagogues in the temple courts. They weren't doing anything illegal, but they were together. And so to hone in on Jesus and who Jesus is, they actually met in homes so that they could actually talk and pray, but they were still putting themselves in danger every time they met. And whenever I've read this, is people said, they met before breakfast. A lot of times even before the sun came up, they would meet together because they needed to, they had to. And so that's why it's every day. And I don't know exactly when in history, the Christian tradition moved to, just, once. And then obviously they moved it to Sunday, the Sabbath. So let's just meet once a week. I don't know when that shifted. I just don't know. But it shifted. But I think in this culture and how new it was and really how illegal it was, they needed to meet every day so that they could grow stronger together, because they needed each other because of the persecution that they were going to have. And so they needed that fellowship every single day. And so now that has become legal, I don't know, maybe we just kind of slip back into, we don't need it every day, because we can get it, on Sundays. And hopefully you're meeting in a group too, or some type of Bible study that goes deeper.
Mm-hmm. I think what we can take away from this is that it's not just on a Sunday that you can do church. Like, church is meant to be done throughout the whole week.
We are the church.
We are the church. Yeah. It's meant to be done either in our homes or wherever you're meeting together. The church isn't necessarily a place, it is a people. And this really highlights that importance, kind of like what you were talking about last week in Gather, too. It's so important.
We're privileged to meet in such a big place. Mm-hmm. That's why I said it, we need to meet in homes, or it's really not church. There's this only meet in homes, church movement, because they're kind of rebelling against the establishment and the organization of religion through church and whatever. But man, I think if they're like, wait, you can meet in this huge building, why aren't there more people here to learn about Jesus?
Yeah, really.
We had to meet secretly before the sun came up in homes. And you can meet whenever you want out in the open and talk about Jesus.
Why wouldn't we be doing that all the time?
Where is everybody?
Yeah. So interesting to take that principle and put it in modern day terms as well. Let's go on to the next one. I know in this scripture it says that the believers had everything in common, but what does that mean? I mean, we're so different, everybody in their personalities. And I mean, if you look at today, there's so many things that seem to divide people, including Christians. So how did you explain having everything in common in regards to this passage and how we can put that in modern day terms as well?
Yeah, I think I said this yesterday, but their minds and what they strive to be was everything that they had in common. So they're thinking of Jesus, how you handle Jesus, that was all the same. How you handle money, how you handle possessions was all the same. You read on in there and it goes further into what did they have in common. Even some possessions. They sold their possessions, a lot of them. And, some person came up and was like, man, why does it have to be so dramatic of, the house or the car? Why couldn't it be, I donated a picnic table? Because I said to him, because donating a picnic table is easy. Anybody can do it. But are you willing to sell your car to pay for somebody's monthly rent because, or their yearly rent because they're so behind? So that your fellow believer, it's easy. Picnic table, that doesn't cost that much. The true gift here is they were literally selling land, selling property, so that their fellow believer doesn't struggle anymore. And so it's like, yeah, people want to give easily. They won't. They don't want to sell their house, their car, but they'll give their extra something.
Yeah, I think if you were to talk to most believers, they wouldn't say that they aren't generous. They want opportunities to be generous, but there's a difference between being generous on a small level and then really sacrificing for helping another person. And I think that's what we're trying to get at here in the midst of it. What am I willing to sacrifice to help my fellow believer?
And there were wealthy believers. There were wealthy believers, but they weren't rich. Because rich in the biblical context is when you have excess and your Christian brother and sister doesn't have enough and you're not willing to give them anything. That's when you have something and they don't, in the necessity aspect, then that means, well, you're rich. And in America, we're all rich. If you've been on a missions trip to a third world country, we are rich. If you have a car, you would be considered rich by the rest of the world. If you have two cars, you're rich. I sat with an African man who, said, in America, you guys have two cars. We don't have any car. I mean, they didn't. They were living in a mud hut, but they realize over here in America what all we have. And they said, you're rich, because even if you have one car, and, then he showed me his room that didn't have a roof and it looked like the mattress had been drug in mud, but he was so proud of it because he had a mattress and he had his own room. It was crazy. I think more Americans need to go on a missions trip because I think even Christians, there'd be a lot less complaining what you have. But, we need to be willing a little bit more in the Christian community to help each other out. I think our church does a great job. Christ Wesleyan is very generous, and we have a reputation of being a generous church, and we really are. When there's a need, we band together and we help people. But I think in terms of, don't just make it about our church. Make it about the Christian community. What are you doing? Just because they don't go to our church doesn't mean, you can't help them. If they're a fellow believer in this context, you helped, and then other people saw that and wanted it.
I think that brings us into a great segue into that third segment, having glad and sincere hearts. And that story that you told me about the man in Africa who was just so happy to have a mattress. I mean, how often do I take my mattress for granted on a daily basis? Like, I get to go home and sit on a couch. I get to go home and sit on a mattress. I get to be in a place with air conditioning and heating. And even though they may not work perfectly all the time, I mean, you have it at least. So, and even the car ride to get to home. If I didn't have a car, how long would it be to walk here to the church simply from Watsontown?
Right, but I love glad and sincere hearts. They were happy to help. They were happy to sell their possessions to give to a fellow believer. They were happy to do it. They were sincere about it, which basically means they did it and didn't want anything in return. Isn't that the greatest giving, though? When you give and you don't want a return? The thing that annoys me a lot is when people give, whatever it is, tithe, resources, and then they hold it over your head. You know?
They want a little something from it.
Right.
It's almost like a bribe more than it is giving.
You know, you take my seat, but I've been paying tithe on that seat for how many years? That's just a little... It's a joke that I've heard. But it's like, no, there's actually some people who legit, you know, because I give my tithe, I deserve this from you, church. That's not biblical giving, you know. We're to give with joyful hearts, glad hearts. And this is what they were doing. They were selling out of, I'm going to sell my property because I want to help you. You know, out of my love, sure, for God, but for you too as a brother and sister, I'm going to do it happily. I'm not going to complain about it, and I'm not going to want anything back from you.
And I think there's a spirit of contentment that we can have as Christians too. It's so easy to look at the possessions of others. I find myself, I went tent camping this past weekend in RB Winter State Park, and I was looking at everybody's nice campers and trucks that were there, and I'm like, oh man, it would be so nice to sit in an air-conditioned camper right now.
Man,
and then
it's so easy
like,
to do.
Well, I ought to be content with what we have right now. I mean, I couldn't ask for more, to be here with friends, to have what we have, to be able to sleep on a pad, and to have a cooler to keep our food in. I mean, we had everything that we would need at that time to enjoy the trip. And it was so hard to not be content with what we have, comparing myself to others. But
it's easy to covet, you know, other things that you don't have. You just have to be intentional of being satisfied.
So let's touch on this last one, enjoying the favor of all the people. You had mentioned in your sermon that the American culture today seems to have a disdain for Christianity, which less and less, more and more people are not becoming Christian. So can you talk a little bit more about that, how we can put that phrase into a modern day context?
Yeah, actually, more people are turning to the Muslim faith right now than they are Christianity. We just heard that stat, which is very sad, but it's because the church isn't being the church. The church has lost something. Somewhere along the lines, we thought it was our job to judge people, you know, and put it out there and put a dress code on church, you know. That's not what church is about. And somewhere along the line, we've missed the point of this Acts 2:42 church, of how we need to act as Christians. They found favor with all people because they were being the church. And the fact that we're not finding favor with people in general, you should teach us something about, hey, let's get our act together. I did say that a little bit yesterday. I wasn't intense enough about it, but you know, it just goes to show we need to get our act together. We need to do this correctly. You know, people shouldn't be running from Christianity because of us. They should be running towards Christianity because of us.
And yeah, you said like yesterday that the government was taking care of the needs, when in reality, it ought to be the church to take care of those needs.
Oh,
and
that was a tough point to hear.
That was a tough
from
point.
Some people. It was tough to say too.
Well, I appreciate you spending time with
Pastor
us.
Kyle, I know I heard the music. What's one of your useless talents? We want to get to know you too.
Oh, let's see. Here's a really useless talent nowadays. I used to repair phones, and I'm really good at finding teeny tiny screws. So I don't do it today, but I can find really teeny tiny screws or pieces of metal really well.
Well, if you're out there and you're missing some glasses, screws, or something, you've heard it here. You got Pastor Kyle.
There you go. Go ahead and let me know. I'll bring my magnets. Well, thank you so much, Pastor Branden, and thank you, audience, for spending some time with us today on the Dive Deep podcast. The heart of why we do this is to bring about transformation for Christians in our community and across the globe in any walk of life to look and be more like Jesus. Be sure to spread the word so more people can benefit from this podcast. You can find us at cwc.life/dive-deep, at CWC Dive Deep on Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube at our Christ Wesleyan Church channel. We look forward to providing you with more great content in the weeks ahead, and I pray that this episode has made you more aware of God's plan for your life. Thanks for joining us.